Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am really glad you are here for this episode today because I have a conversation to share with you that I think is so important for all of us to hear. This conversation is about why maybe you're working so hard and you're not as happy as you think you ought to be. Maybe you're not feeling satisfied. Maybe you are really frustrated with yourself around overeating and emotional eating and feeling like you're not getting anywhere and you're just so mad and guilty about the whole thing. Maybe, like many of us, you are stuck in a cycle with your thoughts where your brain is actually telling you what it takes to be happy, and it's a lie. I brought in an expert to talk to us today, and Dr. Laurie Santos, she knows what she's talking about. Dr. Santos is an expert in the science of happiness and in the ways our minds can tell us lies about what it takes to make us happy. She's a professor at Yale, and her course there, Psychology and the Good Life, became Yale's most popular course in over 300 years, with almost 1 out of 4 students enrolled in this class. Her course has been featured in the New York Times, NBC Nightly News, The Today Show, GQ Magazine, O Magazine, and the online version of her class, which is the Science of Well-Being course on Coursera.org, has attracted over 4.5 million learners from around the world. She's won a ton of awards, both for her science and her teaching, and she was recently voted as one of Popular Science magazine's Brilliant 10 Young Minds, and she was named in Time magazine as a leading campus celebrity. She has her own podcast, which is The Happiness Lab. It is a top 3 Apple podcast and has attracted over 150 million downloads since it launched. And you've probably heard her because she seems to be everywhere these days. So I am thrilled that you've taken time out of your schedule to be here with us today, Laurie. Welcome to the Too Much on Her Plate podcast. So Laurie, I am so glad to have you here. And when I was thinking about you coming on the podcast, after sharing your introduction, I'm sure everybody can realize we could go in a million different directions. There's so much we could talk about. But what I really want to talk about is why we're so hard on ourselves. But first of all, why we're so hard on ourselves and why we are not happier. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about how that kind of interacts and overlaps with how food ends up taking up so much space in
Oh, yeah.
our lives.
Yeah. I think all three of those interact in really nasty ways when it comes to how we feel a lot of the time. But yeah, starting with this idea of why we're so mean to ourselves. Yeah, I think it's partly because we have bad theories of motivation. I think so many of the people listening to this right now are people who are, successful folks, right? Like women who are driven, who have goals, who want to get things done, who want to say yes to as many projects as possible. And we kind of have these theories about how you do that. And I think one theory we have is the sort of drill instructor theory of motivation, that the way I get the most out of myself is I scream at myself like a drill instructor and push myself really hard. And if I didn't do that, then I'd never get off the couch. It'd just be me on the couch with the bonbons all the time, right? And I think that causes us to talk really meanly to ourselves. I think it causes us to not give ourselves grace about limits, about the number of things we put on our plate. It causes us to have really harsh views when we inevitably mess up because we haven't given ourselves enough space or rest. But I think it comes from a good place, which is we're just trying to motivate ourselves. And we can ask whether that's a good theory of motivation, right? Is that just the way the human mind works? And turns out psychologists have looked, and turns out no. Really terrible way to motivate yourself is to scream at yourself. True for motivating anyone. It's a fun fact that motivating anyone, screaming at them doesn't, work as well as you think. What it causes is it causes lots of procrastination. It causes a lot of resistance. So you do the thing that you're screaming at yourself to do for some time, but then as soon as you stop screaming, you go in exactly the opposite direction. And of course, it makes us feel pretty crappy. So not such a great actual way to motivate ourselves.
Why is it so compelling? Because when you describe that, and what I think the question I always ask people and everybody, would you talk to your friend this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you motivate your child this way? And it's always so obvious that no, of course not.
Yeah.
Why is it so compelling to be so mean to ourselves? Why do we keep coming back to that?
Yeah, I think it's 2 things. One, I think we like to believe we can take it, right? We don't really want to
Mm.
push our kids or our best friends to the breaking point, but we have these messed up theories about what we can do. I think this is also why we schedule ourselves with too many things on our plate. It's why we kind of push ourselves past the breaking point when it comes to our goals and our rules about eating and these kinds of things. I think we kind of think like, no, 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 I can take it, which sort of fits with that's nice. That's a nice feeling to have. It feels like we're tough. We're sort of badass, like we can take it. But of course, we're also human, have the same constraints as other humans. I think another thing is that we're really worried that we're going to be too soft on ourselves. We're really worried about self-indulgence, right? And I think we don't worry as much about indulging our friends or our kids. Maybe we should be worrying more about indulging our kids. It's a whole other different conversation. But I think we're really worried that if we didn't kind of hold ourselves to the rod, that we just would never get anything done. And so I think it's almost like we really don't want the pendulum to go in a self-indulgence direction. And so we wind up swinging it too far towards just being mean.
Which is so interesting. And that was actually something I wanted to ask you, because I feel like this idea of self-compassion, which I talk about a lot and which I think is so important. And yet I feel like it's this word you have to kind of be very careful about, because for a lot of people, it feels like, first of all, I don't know why self-indulgence is bad. I think maybe we could talk about that. But also, I feel like people are okay maybe with self-compassion as long as you say, well, it's not self-indulgent. It's not being kind to yourself. And then there's this whole idea that self-compassion is fluffy.
Yeah, like it has terrible marketing. Yeah. If we called it like, maximum performance for women or something, which it is empirically, people would be really into it. But yeah, self-compassion sounds fluffy.
Say more about that. Tell me how self-compassion is maximum performance for women.
Well, there's so much empirical data on what happens when we talk to ourselves with self-compassion. And it's worth kind of defining what that means. Yeah. Again, because as you know, we get this wrong so much. I love the psychologist Kristen Neff's definition. She's a professor at UT Austin. And she talks about self-compassion as having these three parts. Part number one is a sense of mindfulness. You know what's going on. You're like, this is tough right now. This is really hard right now. I feel like a failure. I feel ashamed. I'm having a tough day. And you kind of experience that mindfulness with a kind of sense of radical acceptance. Like you're not kind of pushing against it. You're just like, this is how it is. This is tough right now. That's mindfulness. Part number two, which I find is the hard part for probably a lot of the women listening to this podcast, is the common humanity part. You say, this is really tough right now. And that makes sense because I'm just human. Or that makes sense because this is a really hard time in my schedule. Or that makes sense because everybody screws up and feels ashamed sometimes, right? You say, common human experience. I am not some magical robot that can do everything. I'm just a human like everybody else. That's kind of part two of self-compassion. But part three is the magical part. And that's what Kristen Neff calls self-kindness. You say, how can I be nice to myself? What can I take off my plate? How can I treat myself like a friend, right? Given that this is a common human experience, how can I just treat myself like I'm human? And those three things together are the kind of thing that allow us to talk to ourselves with more kindness, more compassion, but also to treat ourselves better. And so Kristen's gone off and said, okay, if you talk to yourself with those three parts, mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness, what happens? And she finds it really is just like a fabulous formula. You procrastinate less. You wind up achieving more. You wind up being kinder to the other people around you, because one of the hardest people to be kind to is ourselves. So then once you get good at practicing compassion to yourselves, it's really easy to be compassionate with your kids and your spouse and your coworkers and so on. But more, it gets you through incredibly tough times. She's done this lovely work with people who are in true traumatic situations. So she's worked with veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And she finds the ones that she can train to talk to themselves with kindness, they go through the same horrible stuff. They're in as much combat, see as much death and destruction, but they're less likely to come out with high rates of PTSD, this post-traumatic stress disorder. So even when things are actually going bad, when your mindfulness is going, this is terrible, this is an awful situation, you don't react to it as awfully because you're not beating yourself up the whole time.
I think that's so important. And I actually think that the first stage, mindfulness, and I teach that a lot, it is self-compassion to say, this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm having just a crap day, or, I'm so tired of this battle with food. I am so tired of, and here I did it again, and it is so hard. And I think that the idea that that is okay or that that's important, I guess it goes against the inner drill sergeant thing that you were
Totally,
talking about.
because you're not allowed to have a bad day, with the drill
Yeah.
sergeant. It's like, and I think that, a symptom of not paying attention to that mindfulness step, to not noticing what's really going on, is all the stuff you talk about on this podcast. What are you kind of filling the void with if you can't allow yourself to admit, I need rest, or I need a break, or this is really hard? You often fill it with food, among other kind of bad
Mhm.
things that ultimately are not kind of serving your purpose of recognizing, no, what I need is rest, or no, what I need is just an acknowledgement to myself that this sucks right now. And so I think that mindfulness first step is so critical, because if you're not paying attention to that, you wind up doing all kinds of things to cover up the fact that it's not really going okay. And that doesn't really serve you well either.
And there's shame too, right? Shame and guilt, because if you're
Mhm.
not supposed to be a human being, and if you're not, if this isn't supposed to be hard, because I think that's
Yes.
the thing, right? It's like, well, it shouldn't be hard. I should
Mhm.
have figured
Yeah, I
this
mean, the
out.
steps when I engage in mindfulness, it's often like a meta mindfulness of like, this is hard right now, and I don't want it to be hard. I am ashamed that it's hard. I'm embarrassed that it's hard. I'd like to pretend it's not hard. I'd really like to push through and it not be hard. That just makes it all worse, of course.
Well, okay, you say of course, but let's talk about the difference between shaming ourselves and guilting ourselves and having a self-compassion approach. Would
Yeah.
tell me about what you can say from science and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that common humanity step is really the critical one. I'm like, that's the moment where you're like, this sucks right now. I'm ashamed right now. That's step number one, which is already hard, right? To give ourselves space to notice how crappy we are feeling. But if we get to the point of noticing how crappy we are feeling and saying, and that makes sense, not only do I not have to be ashamed of it, like, of course this is happening. Like, there's no one to whom this doesn't happen. Like, I'm just a human. It's okay. And even as I sow those words to you on your podcast, I'm curious what listeners are feeling. I just feel like "Huh." Like, it's okay. It makes sense. There's nothing wrong with me. It just like, this is just how it is, right? Already you can kind of lift that kind of moment of feeling like so ashamed and so kind of caught up in just feeling this nastiness. Like, nah, that makes sense. Of course, everyone goes through it. I do this with my students. I'm a faculty member at Yale. And so I teach lots of incredibly type A, brilliant students whose tendency to beat themselves up is incredibly strong. And when I just tell them, like, of course you're going to mess up your first year and, like, feel like you picked the wrong classes. Of course you're going to feel overwhelmed and like there's not enough time to get in these opportunities. Like, that's just what it's like to be an Ivy League student. Like, everybody feels like that. You can just watch their shoulders drop and just, huff. I have permission to feel how I'm feeling. I don't have to have that additional layer of shame, which isn't working.
Well, not only not working, but it derails everything because, of course,
Totally.
you're having these experiences as a freshman at Yale, or of course, you're having these experiences when you're trying to change your relationship with food because you're used to doing something else, and this is that learning moment, right? This
Mhm.
is where you're figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and when we go into shame and guilt, it just I feel like self-compassion is one of the things that opens up the possibility for growth and for
That's exactly
learning
right.
and for
Because
change.
when you're in the mode of both denying your feelings and denying that it's natural, you don't look for the right solutions, right? If I'm like, it is my fault that I feel this. I shouldn't feel this about changing my relationship with food. It should be so easy, right? What the heck's my problem? Now I'm not looking to correct solutions about like, well, maybe I need some rest, or maybe I need to open things up, or maybe I need to change my rigidity. I'm just thinking that the correct response is, well, I got to push myself more. Then the drill instructor, starts cracking
Mhm.
the whip even further, right? And so I think the problem is that it doesn't work because it doesn't allow us to see the right solutions. And the right solutions often come from that third step of self-kindness. You say, what do I need right now? Or a phrase I've heard you say on the podcast, what do I know about what I need right now? Sometimes it's hard to admit that we need something, right? We're still baby
Mhm.
steps in the self-compassion. But what do I know about what I need right now? How would I talk to a friend? What would I suggest to a friend that she needed right now if she was in the same situation I am in? And now the problem solving is turned on. Now you're looking for adequate solutions like, you don't need another diet plan, you need a rest, or you need to ask your husband for some help, around the house with the kids, or you need to do the hard step of taking something off your plate. I think when we think self-compassion, there's a different kind of mistake we make, which is we get into the like self-help magazine mode of self-compassion where we think it's like, it's a bubble bath, or it's like, oh, whatever. And often it's not. It's a hard conversation with somebody that you might need to ask help from. It's really admitting that, what you're pushing yourself to do is just too tough. Maybe the expectations you have about whether it's weight loss or your relationship with food, maybe you got to ease up on those because it's just realistically just not going to happen. And those are a lot harder, than running to the nearest, drugstore to get a nice bath bomb. Those are tricky, but you can only see those solutions if you give yourself the space and the kindness to allow yourself to say, without shame, this is a real limit as a human, and I have to honor that.
Okay, what you said there just struck me as so important. This idea that we have to have space is huge, and that self-compassion can be uncomfortable, right?
For sure, yeah.
Self-compassion doesn't have to feel good. That's not the litmus test. Being really kind to yourself sometimes is uncomfortable, but it takes space to be able to see that and also to do uncomfortable things.
Yeah. And I think that this kind of how would you treat a friend, thinking of self-compassion as kind of being compassionate to others, you get that sense that it's uncomfortable, right? Some of the most compassionate conversations I've ever had with friends are some of the most uncomfortable, right? They weren't uncomfortable because I was treating my friend like a drill instructor and I was like, you need to change your behavior and screaming at them. They were uncomfortable because I said, look, I care about you and this isn't working. Like, let's problem solve. Why are we going at it like this, right? Let's kind of get to the real reasons behind this, which can be hard to look at. And then you get to the solutions of what you have to do, and it's often really uncomfortable. This whole process would be easier if we could solve all our food issues by just buying a bunch of bath bombs and like being compassionate in that way. Sadly, it often takes harder conversations with ourselves and if we're being compassionate with others.
But I bet there's somebody trying to sell those bath bombs.
I know, the like food rules bath bombs. I'm sure
That's
there's one. Yeah.
So, okay. At competition with self-compassion or in competition with self-compassion is so often the soundtrack that we have in our heads. Right. Like you can listen to this podcast episode, you can read Kristen Neff's books, you can do all the stuff, and then you still have the drill instructor in there who just feels like she sabotages everything.
Mhm.
For somebody listening to this who knows I don't talk nicely to myself, it is not helpful, but it just feels like who I am. What do you know about what works to start to change that?
Yeah. Well, I would say if you're listening to this and think, I talk to myself like that, you're already at step one, right? Because you've noticed that terrible voice in your head. I find that it's even harder when we're at the stage before that, which again, I see in lots of my students, and I'm sure you see in your practice of people trying to change their relationship with food, is you don't even realize the voice is as harsh as it is, right? And so if you're thinking like, that drill instructor sounds like me, it's like, Sergeant Me in my head, you're already at stage one because you realized it. Now the next step is just to practice probing that voice and questioning it. And there's a few ways that the research suggests we can do it. One that I love because it's just so easy is just to give a name to that voice. You can call it Sergeant Laurie, or you can call it Karen. A lot of my students use Karen because I think that's just like a name that they make fun of. Apologies to any Karens who are listening now. But call it whatever, call it your mother-in-law. But say, okay, Sergeant Laurie, I hear you. You think, you're really screwing up right now and that sucks. Why is that so powerful? You're just distancing that voice from reality to like a voice in your head. And the studies show it's really powerful. It just gives you a little psychological distance to ask, do I need to believe that? Could I think something different, based on this thought? So that's kind of step number one. And then step number two is to just practice going through those 3 steps that Kristen Neff talks about to engage a little self-compassion. She has a hack that I love teaching my students, which she knows that sometimes changing our self-talk is really hard, but it's easy to bring in a physical behavior. And there are lots of physical behaviors that signal self-compassion and sort of self-love. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can't see, but a quick action you can do is just take your hand and kind of stroke your arm in a nice way, or give yourself a little self-hug. If it was your child who was going through something, you'd probably have an instinct to kind of give them a hug or kind of like a little stroke. Oh, honey, it's okay. You just do that physical thing to yourself. And a funny thing about the human brain, it doesn't know who's touching you. We know about this in other kind of contexts, right? But like, it doesn't know that that hug's coming from you. It just feels, a very soft caress and a kind action towards itself. And it works. And that can be a nice signal, I know, for me that I need to switch my talk around. So when I'm hearing the drill instructor voice, Sergeant Laurie is going off, I say, you just give myself a little hug. And then that's a signal to go through those steps. Mindfulness. This sucks right now. I hate this. I feel really ashamed that I'm having such a hard time with this. Common humanity. But this just makes sense. This is how you process, this relationship with food. This is going through a tough time in life. Self-kindness. What can I take off my plate? What do I know about what I need right now? How would I talk to a friend who is going through something like this? And for me, when I'm doing the kind of self-stroking or a little self-hug, it's just a little cue. Okay, change your self-talk around. So that's one that I love to use.
That's really useful. And it reminds me of a conversation I just had with somebody who I think if she was here would say, okay, I got the compassion piece. I can give myself the little hug. I can ask myself, okay, what do I need? What do I need to do? And then she would tell you for the next, and I'm realist. She would give you a very realistic list of why she could do nothing and it was impossible and the situation isn't fixable. And of course she has plenty of compassion. The situation sucks, but it's a loop, right? So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that, because we've all been there.
Oh, completely, right? And I'm talking about this stuff as though I'm good at it. I'm as much a student as one of my Ivy League students.
We're all human beings.
We are all human beings, and we're all learning, right? I mean, the sad thing is, like, none of this stuff is natural, right? I think a motivating factor that I sometimes think about is that there's also lots of evidence that the more you can develop a self-compassionate voice with yourself, you make it easier for the people around you to use that voice, especially moms and their young kids. So if as a mom, you struggle with this, but you want your kid to be nice to themselves, you don't want your kid screaming at themselves like a drill instructor, practicing it with yourself is one of the best ways to teach it. And so sometimes I find that factoid can give people permission who otherwise have a trouble with this to kind of do it themselves. But yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard for all of us. But yeah, I think if you're in the mode of recognizing like, oh, I just can't, I see no path forward. This is where I think this role playing as a friend can be really helpful. And one way that studies from folks like Ethan Cross at the University of Michigan suggest we can do this is just to talk to ourselves literally as though we're a friend, using the pronouns we would use to talk to a friend, namely you, second person, Laurie. It sounds a little goofy. It sounds a little Yoda, like from Star Wars in your brain, where I'm like, Laurie, you can do this or whatever. But there's literal studies showing that it's powerful. So when you get really stuck, say, okay, I don't know my way out of this. Let's talk about this, Laurie. What can you do a little bit differently? Is there any path forward? Is there anything you can take off your plate, Laurie? Well, maybe I could take off, just one meeting. Okay, where are you going to take off that meeting, right? Just like go into your calendar and cross something out, or just talk to, like, really look for something. But you see what I'm doing there? I'm saying, look, Laurie, you can do this. And two things happen. One is when I hear, hey, Laurie, you can do this, that activates a friend talking to me. I'm much more likely to take compassion with that kind of style of language than if I'm talking to myself. But the second thing it does is more powerful. It turns you into a better problem solver. Usually when I'm using you, the second person language, or talking with somebody's name, Dr. Melissa, you should do whatever, usually I'm coming up with good strategies because we're much better at giving advice to other people than ourselves, right? When we have that conversation with a friend, we're much better at giving advice. But we are just like turning on those same mechanisms for ourselves. And just those little language cues do it. I mean, there's some just fascinating studies where you tell people, talk to yourself and how you normally do it. Like, oh, I'm such a, what is going on? Why can't I do this? Versus, hey, Laura, you can, how should you figure this out? And just that little linguistic switch gets our problem solving mode going better. It causes people to be more self-compassionate, but it also causes people to ruminate less. So you don't get stuck in those loops as much, and you're more likely to come up with better strategies. It also shuts off negative emotions. So talking to yourself in the sort of second and third person makes you less anxious too, which I think is, part of our struggle when we're in the mindfulness loop of this sucks. Anything we can do to reduce that emotional burden can be helpful too.
I love that. I love that. I knew a little bit about that, but okay. So because you're right, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Just to your, okay.
And I think with all of these, like, I mean, there's a lot of ridiculous stuff that works that just that looks ridiculous that works, right? It's funny. I feel like we accept this in the food and diet domain. If there was videos of us doing half the stuff we do to try to develop a perfect relationship with food, we'd look really stupid. We accept that there. But when it comes to being kinder to ourselves, well, that sounds stupid. I'm not going to try it, So just try it. Mine are dumb. They're in beta version still. There's a lot of stuff that looks dumb that's really quite effective.
Yeah, this whole question of why we are so against being kind to ourselves, I find it really fascinating. So when I was sharing your bio, I love that there's this how you are, expert at the science of how our minds lie to us about what makes us happy. And I want to make sure we go into that. I mean, we have been, but because that, as you know, touches my heart.
Okay.
And it's so insidious. Right? Just like the drill sergeant versus the self-compassion, we think we're doing the right thing. We think we are helping ourselves. So tell us more about how we are lying to ourselves and some of the stuff that maybe we're doing that we think is good for us that is keeping us stuck.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and I think so many things that are really relevant to what you cover on this podcast, right? Like how we can develop a healthier relationship with food. So one of the big ones is how much we prioritize money, accolades, material possessions, stuff, more, versus just having some rest, just having some free time. Tons of studies on this new concept that's called time affluence, which is kind of being wealthy in time. Usually when we think of wealth, we think of money and material stuff. This is being wealthy in the ability to just look at your calendar and there's just space for stuff. If your friend texts you, is like, hey, I'm going to be in town the next couple weeks. Do you have time for coffee? It's not how about never? Because you just look and you just have bandwidth, right? We, or at least I'm imagining many of the people listening to the podcast, me included, just do not prioritize this stuff at all, right? How many times do we grab that last 15 minutes in our calendar just to add one more meeting with the hope that, it'll make us a little bit more productive or it'll get us, one more accolade at work or something. And study after study shows we'd just be better off leaving that space open. Studies show that if you self-report the opposite of time affluence, which is what researchers call time famine, where you're literally starving for time, I think it's very relevant how much these metaphors play into food concepts, right? That if you're feeling time famished, that's as bad as recently becoming unemployed for your well-being. So if you say, I'm really starved for time, that's as bad as losing your job, right? In terms of your happiness and your well-being. Yet so many of us not only feel time famished, but we do it willingly. We do it kind of knowingly.
We do it
nobly. We're proud of it,
Yes.
How are you doing this week? How was your summer? How are you feeling? Oh, busy. And then we kind of pat ourselves on the shoulder because look at us, we're so busy. But it's actually kind of making us miserable. And so one of the big happiness hacks that I talk to my students about and that I honestly really try to work on myself is, sort of fighting that lie of the mind, right? Trying to realize that a little bit of spaciousness in time is going to matter more than, whatever performance I'm going to get at work from that next meeting. And even trying to kind of hack my time so that you feel like you have a little bit more time. Because sometimes, let's be realistic, folks, if you're listening now, you probably have a lot on your plate, whether it's kids or work or whatever. Objectively opening up more time might not help, but there are things we can do to do that, in our brains, but maybe not in real life. You can, for example, spend some money to get back some time, right? Hire the neighbor's kid to mow the lawn, get takeout just so you save yourself a little bit of work or just, the pre-chopped veggies, whatever it is. Just kind of giving yourself a gift of time can feel amazing. This is one of the reasons that every time I teach my happiness class on campus, I like to have one lecture that's in the syllabus on time affluence. But the trick is that it's not going to be a lecture. Students are going to show up for class. And I hand them a little flyer that says, hey, time affluence is so important. And now I've given you some. Surprise, no class. And what's amazing is how students react. It's only an extra hour and 15 minutes that they get. But some of them literally burst into tears. And they'll say things like, I haven't had a free hour and a half in as long as I can remember. So giving yourself that gift, literally if you're listening right now, go into your calendar months from now, just put a little block in there in your Google Calendar that says time affluence. And I promise when you hit that hour, you will enjoy it. But we just don't realize that that's when we think of a gift we can give to ourselves, it's a treat. It's something that costs money. Whereas the true gift to ourselves might be spaciousness, to rest, to think about new creative ideas, to meet with friends, to do whatever, but just spaciousness. No should in a small time block can feel amazing, but our brains don't realize that.
We are so wired to do, right?
Mhm.
Everything to do. What should I do? What do I do to fix it? And it's the older I get, and also the more I do this work, so many of the answers have nothing to do with doing.
Yeah, but it can be so hard to stop doing. I mean, this is something I know I experience too, right? Even when I get those little time affluence blocks, I'm like, well, now I will do the thing that will, maximize this time. I will meet with friends. I will meditate. I will go exercise. Like, even in my brain, I'm trying to fill it with stuff that I can do to feel happier. But you're exactly right. What you really want to do is just to be, to get rid of all the shoulds, the shoulding all over yourself, as I like to tell my students.
Well, I think, we get so into what do I need to do? And the question of who do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
We don't ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And our brains are really prone to see more, more, more. It's really hard for us to think in terms of less, less, less. If you're feeling unhappy, often you want to add something to your plate. Maybe you want to buy something, or maybe if you know the happiness science, like I'm going to add a meditation practice, or I'm going to add a new exercise routine. It's very hard to ask, what am I taking off the plate? Like not take off the plate to then meditate, but just
Right.
like take off the plate. Like I'm just going to cross that off. So hard to do. And I think it's just like our brains don't think in terms of
that
absence.
will not sneak that
Yeah.
our brain.
Well, one is to use the fact that we're less worried about the productivity of our future selves. So if I said, today, go in your GCal and take an hour off, you'd be like, oh, I can't. It's already packed up. I couldn't cancel that meeting. But if I say, in 3 months, go in your GCal and put a little block that says time affluence, that doesn't feel as scary. And so locking yourself into future time openness and really locking it in, right? Don't just have it and then cross it off. That can feel safer. And once you get up to it, it can be really helpful. Another way to do it that I find, because my schedule is often really packed, is that I like to use, when you have these moments of windfalls of time, to leave them open. So I have this new rule that I'm trying out this semester, that if something gets canceled, I can't put anything into that date. Like, it still stays in the date book. So I travel a lot to give talks. I was supposed to be traveling to give this talk, and it recently just got canceled. It's like about 3 weeks away. And I've promised myself that I'm going to leave that talk in the calendar. It's as though it still exists. I can't fill it with something else. And that works because, it was recent that it was in there, right? So it's even easier than like going in and erasing it. But that like lets us use these little windfalls of things that we get in the future to be kinder to ourselves. Those are just some little silly hacks I use, but the stuff is hard. You got to come up with these little mini rules, mini hacks to protect yourself.
But I think what you have shared today is such a service because you've given us the why, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love listening to your podcast. I love talking to you because you can stuff that, okay, I know this. You can give us the facts and the research behind us, and no, it's actually proven. It actually is. It actually is a high performance technique to have self-compassion,
Yeah.
right? I love that one, right? Spaciousness is good for you. Like all these things that sound good, or they sound kind of good and maybe they're a little fluffy and dangerous, you can give us some proof for.
And this is the thing that we get wrong so much. If our only goal was to be as productive as possible, common humanity be damned, like our rest be damned, right? The ironic thing is what we would probably do is talk to ourselves with kindness. What we know from the productivity work is that what we would do to be the most productive as possible is to work for a shorter amount of time. A new podcast that's coming up is one where I talked to Juliet Schor, who's the author of The 4-Day Workweek. And she's been doing studies for decades, finding that when we work less days, we wind up more productive than if we worked more days. So oftentimes when people switch from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, they get more done than if they had worked for the full 5 days. And that seems mind-boggling. Like our brains just can't latch on to that. But what that means is we're often not just setting ourselves up for lives and schedules that feel overwhelming, that cause us to, have bad relationships with food and not take care of ourselves, but also we're working less well. Like we're often, even if our overall goal is productivity, we're not achieving that as well as we could be.
I love this. So all this is just great I want to say ammunition, but I don't want to use that word.
Yeah, like it shouldn't be the case that we have to
Yeah.
like figure out we should just want to do it to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's more ironic that we're wrong about how to be most productive, right? It'd be one thing if we were a drill instructor and it's like, actually just being super mean to yourself is the way to go if you want to be productive. But like our brains are wrong. It's actually just being nice to ourselves is the what to do if you just want to be productive.
I love it. Okay, so if people are really excited about this and they want to know more, where can they get more Dr. Laurie Santos?
Yeah, so you should check me out on the Happiness Lab podcast, which you can download wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get this podcast, you can check it out. And I actually have a free course online on Coursera.org. It's called The Science of Wellbeing. So if you want a more like in-depth nerdy version, you can hop on there and learn more that way too on Coursera.org.
Coursera, it's C-O-U-R.
Like course ERA, like Coursera.
Okay.
Or honestly, if you just Google Laurie Happiness Lady course, you'll find it.
And we'll put the link in the show notes and all those places where we put links, but that's such a great resource. And are you doing something for teens or kids or?
Yeah, so one of the funny things we heard when we first put together that course was so many people said, these strategies, like, I wish I learned them when I was younger. Or, I'm a parent and I really want my teens to learn this stuff. So we did a version of that online class for teenagers. We called it The Science of Wellbeing for Teens. So that's also available on YouTube and Coursera. I'll give you the links. But a funny thing, once we made that course that we found, which I think fits with a lot of the stuff you talk about on your podcast, is that when we looked at who was actually taking that teenager course, it was more parents who were really anxious about their kids, who were trying to learn strategies for the kids, but then also for themselves. So we recently made a version of the course specifically for busy, overwhelmed parents called The Science of Wellbeing for Parents. So if you're a parent who is like, I really want to learn these strategies for my kids, but secretly I want to learn these strategies just for myself, we can hook you up with that new course too.
Yeah. And you're allowed to do things just for yourself.
Exactly. It doesn't have to just be for your kids. Yeah.
Okay. Anything before we wind this up, anything we didn't talk about or that you want people to walk away with?
No, this was great.
Fun.
Yeah. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule. And this has just been phenomenal. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey.